jumping straight into fighting a mimic is kind of a good way to waste a mimic in that scenario. Sometimes, I think at one point I had a big bag of gold spill over, and so there were just like hundreds of little tiny coin mimics that became sort of a horde, a swarm. NPCs are just characters, and I think one of the ways you make good characters is by finding things. There's one thing about mimics in 5th edition that annoy me. I don't know if I'm the only one, but the first ever mimic encounter that I really seriously did was in an inn, like I said, in a tavern. Players were staying there, and a witch transformed the items in their room into mimics, just like a couple each. There weren't a ton like this or anything. And they were attacked sort of basically in bedclothes, right? They didn't have armor, they didn't have their weapons handy, and they all kind of had to scramble, and it became like a fight in the hallway with them calling out to one another. It was a lot of fun. And that, I think, is what had me seeking out the bed frame mimic there. Which, if I remember, I'll look up a link for and put it. I want to make sure the people who model these get credit down below, so you guys, if you like them, can go and check them out. So I'll do my best to find links for everything I paint here. I feel like how terrifying a cooking pot mimic is directly connected to how much of what's inside the pot you've eaten before you realize it's a mimic. That was the first substantial mimic encounter I did. That wasn't the first. So I think literally the first time I ever ran anything, any encounter with a mimic was in the Essentials kit, the Gnomon Guard section, because that location is being attacked by or being sort of terrorized by a mimic. And thinking back, like, I didn't really know how to do it well, how to sort of build up that encounter, because I think a mimic you can use a mimic a lot of different ways, but jumping straight into fighting a mimic is kind of a good way to waste a mimic in that scenario. Sometimes surprise mimics are the perfect way to use mimics, right? If the players don't know that that's what the threat is going to be, that's a good way to do it. In that experience in the Essentials kit, it's supposed to be this kind of, or I think the intention is that it's sort of like you have to hunt through the place to find the mimic. But I didn't know when I ran that. I wasn't even in a place where I could think about, okay, how do I build up sort of the mystery of this? How do I keep it ever present, but sort of make it the bulk of the encounter is sort of finding it. Fighting the mimic is probably like the least interesting part, because now you found your monster and you're fighting it, but chasing it through a place and cornering it and making sure it can't transform into anything else and try to get away, and keeping an eye on what things have transformed in a location and what hasn't. That, when I think about mimics now, that's what I want. That's the type of experience that I want to give my players, I just didn't know how to do it the first time I used mimics. Not to claim that I know now, but I think I have a lot more tools and a lot more experience to work with, so it makes me want to revisit again. It's actually pretty good inspiration for mimic encounters. I think there's a video game called Prop Hunt. I've never played it, but I've seen footage of it before. Everybody in the game is basically role-playing as a mimic constantly. So I've been trying to think of interesting ways to keep running my game, even if not everybody can make it. So I've definitely been kind of thinking about more kind of one-shots, side shots, kind of asides that I can introduce to my game just to keep sessions going. It'd be super experimental, and maybe it wouldn't work at all. Setting a one-shot where one of the players is hunting and all of the other players are basically hiding mimics that are shifting from place to place, and somehow communicating that to the DM. I bet there's a way to do that. Or it'd be fun, even just in a campaign. It'd be interesting to see a situation where the players are sort of friends to a mimic, and maybe helping a mimic escape a location, and so the players are sort of the ones sort of saying, okay, become this, and then we can carry you to this location, but don't transform, then become this. Like, if everybody's looking for a mimic, but the players have to help the mimic get out of town or something like that. Dregalus, he said, do you make your one-shots with your players' campaign, or do you have them completely separate? Both and. I do both, and rarely do I have an idea that just has to be in the campaign world that I have. Like, I think most of the time, if it's a good idea and it's fun to play, it's not such a big deal to sort of extrapolate it, so that it could run with anybody. So, for instance, like pretty much all of the one-shots I've ever written, I've been able to run for multiple groups with very little. I shouldn't say very little. Like, I transform it every time I run it, right? Most recently, I had I guess I have there's a trend. It's not every time I've used mimics, but I guess I have a tendency to use them in conjunction with witches. A different player group than the other one was trying to deal with a town full of witches. So actually there were 4. They didn't know that until they took care of 3, but it was a 4-witch town. And one of the witches had basically commandeered a magic shop and just infested it with mimics. So everything in there sort of turned into a mimic. Unfortunately, I didn't have all of this stuff ready, but that was definitely, an idea at the time was, if I could sit down and get all those minis ready, that would be a really cool way to do it. But that's okay, because you don't need minis to do cool encounters. They're just fun. So that one was really cool as a mimic encounter, because there were some players there that didn't necessarily have a lot of familiarity with mimics. So the experience was, they're newer players to the game, which is amazing. And so that was a very sort of singular experience for them, of sort of uncovering that these things were jelly-like and sort of transforming in their hands, and now they were a threat. And I think at one point I had a big bag of gold spill over, and so there were just like hundreds of little tiny coin mimics that became sort of a horde, a swarm that they had to deal with. So that was a fun, sort of different sort of mimic encounter. But yeah, I guess I sort of think of them as sort of minions to big. I think I've mostly used them as witch minions, I guess, or at least tools of a witch, which is kind of interesting. I think there's a lot of other ways to use them, but Cage King, you said prologue sessions for each player sounds like an insanely cool idea that I somehow haven't heard before. I don't know how common it is. I don't hear many people talk about it either. I've done a couple of videos on it on my channel. I should probably make a playlist at this point because it keeps coming up. But it's a really great way to sort of cheat a little bit as a DM, because you can seed a bunch of ideas about the world and help the players feel like established and understand their voice and their role before you throw everybody together in the first session, and then everybody's kind of like, awkward figuring themselves out. You can kind of give everybody a little bit more ground to stand on before the campaign really begins. Yeah, and running solo sessions is something you can do anytime. I like doing it when a campaign begins, so I get a lot of, it also gives the DM and the player some time to sort of figure stuff out and establish more backstory and kind of build on those ideas, which is worth it, I think. But then anytime that parties split up or somebody ends up off on their own, solo sessions are fun too. They can be really challenging sometimes. But that's just another way to do the same idea. What was I about to do? I think I was about to share another mimic encounter that I've run. I've only done a few, but I think they're all interesting in a different way because it happened during a prologue session. So I run solo prologue sessions with my players. This was a player who was new to the game, which I also love. It's one of my favorite things. Introducing people to these games is amazing. So it was the rogue player who was newest to the game, and so for their prologue, it was basically about them coming into town and spotting that this one particular really expensive house in this kind of roadside town, all things considered, pretty well off home, actually had like thieves' cant written outside of it that caught her eye. And so she, you know, decided to go check it out. The thieves' camp, by the way, it was sort of a honeypot thing. The person in the house wanted to draw. Basically, it's an easy mark, easy gold, worth your time, that type of messaging. And it just so happened that this house belonged to the guild leader at the time, which the players would find out 8 levels later was a lich, and that this guild was sort of a front for his means of staying alive. Anyway, the lich in this house has a pet mimic, still has a pet mimic in that campaign, actually. And so the rogue, going from room to room, floor to floor, and looking for things to swipe, kind of noticed that things were moving from room to room, level to level, and investigated. And ended up having this encounter that didn't go hostile, because new players have this wonderful ability to not make a bunch of assumptions necessarily, because some of these monsters they've just never heard of before. And so this was more of a social encounter, actually, which was helpful because, then the owner of the house could step in and no, this is my pet, we're all good. And it became this really memorable thing and really fun for that player to learn, because since they didn't really have the ability to metagame, because they just didn't know some of these things that other experienced players might, it didn't even really occur to them that an average guild leader, old man, whatever, having a pet mimic is really weird. Mimics as a thing that people have as pets would be a really crazy thing, and eventually that kind of they figured that out, right? That came out, but it's one of the fun parts of running prologues is that every player can sort of get these little tidbits and clues, and if they were to talk through what they experience, which not everybody always does, but if they do, they might learn things and come to conclusions that they couldn't come to on their own. So that ended up being like, not, while it wasn't a big cool fight encounter, ended up being a really interesting way to use a mimic for me, because it was like storytelling and ended up having big campaign impacts, kind of fleshed out the world and the characters. Like, yeah, definitely one of my favorite uses of a mimic. Mischief. How do you make good NPCs? It's a great question. NPCs are just characters. And I think one of the ways you make good characters is by finding things about them that you can agree with. Humanizing them. You don't want to make them, or sometimes you do, but like when I think about them, it's like I want them to feel real. Sometimes I'll pull from people that I know, or I'll just think of sort of archetypes of like, okay, this person had this kind of life. But my biggest tip for good NPCs, and this is, I think, super, super important, and I don't know how common this type of advice is. When you're building out characters, NPCs in particular, you want to sort of try to catch yourself and pay attention to what really is a trait and what is not. So, for example, funny is not a character trait. Funny is a judgment that people can make about a character, but it's not a character trait that you can apply to them. Same goes for handsome, charming, all these, attractive in general, like all of these descriptions that you may want people to have about them. Part of the issue that I've felt myself and that I see other DMs falling into is that when you, or even characters, even players, if you describe your character as funny or as brave, it does this weird thing in other people's minds where they go, okay, well, we'll see. Like, I'll judge that. And now they're actually probably going to judge it harsher than they would otherwise. An NPC or a character being funny, that's not a trait. If the NPC thinks they're funny, that's a trait. But that also is like, you see how that, if that becomes a personality almost in and of itself, whereas saying something's funny, funny is kind of like scary. It's really hard to control those things. They just sort of happen, and you embrace them when they happen. But if you give me 2 NPCs and this one, the DM's telling me, this guy's so funny, and over here, it's like, this guy, this NPC has an odd collection of acorns, in his bag. I'm infinitely more interested in this person with a weird collection than I am with this, like, oh, this really funny, hilarious NPC. So I think a big part of that is like identifying what a trait is, and just like trying to find interesting ones to give people that help flesh out real character. I can't say that I have an established mimic lore in my games. Like, I don't necessarily know the ecology of these things. Like, I don't have anything that I care about. So, do they procreate? Do they split like chromosomes, and now you have two mimics and they have to like kind of regrow themselves? Like, I don't know much about these things, so anything's possible. I think, at least from my perspective, or at least there's nothing I feel too strongly about yet. So anything's possible. Noel, your question about a tavern keeper. A hub is a good way to treat them. I also, this matters more kind of as you explore the world, but it can be difficult. But I like to try to think up something unique about every tavern. I don't give myself the task of doing like, this is the big capital city. There are 100 taverns here. I got to come up with all of those. But if there's a town, that the group is passing through and there's a tavern there, it's like, okay, what makes this tavern memorable compared to all the other ones? And it could be as simple as the karaoke night, or it could be that this tavern is run by the town mayor's son, or whatever. Just some quirk about it that then everything kind of hangs on that. And then inevitably I end up thinking of like, okay, well, this could tie into a side quest or something in this town. Certainly even just like world building, like, who runs the tavern and what peculiar situation the tavern is in is going to reverberate through the entire town, probably. When my players were traveling through the Underdark once, there was a town, a community that lived there, and one of a tavern that they came across, the thing that was unique about it was that there was a strange wall. The tavern was sort of built around it. I think it had a name. I can't remember it off the top of my head, but a name that evoked what this wall did. And basically, standing near it, in different places, you could sort of, it was almost like you were acoustically hearing places in the world above, right? It was almost like a tuning fork, but stone. And effectively it allowed them to use this as like entertainment. So sometimes they would be able to connect almost like radio waves to like other venues, or there were little mentions here and there that the players even recognized of different locations they've been to. Underdark is weird stuff, weird things that I wouldn't necessarily probably want to put that in. I mean, I could technically let go anywhere, but something memorable about a tavern, I think, makes it more fun, and more worth like the players exploring and stuff. I don't do that every time, but if I have the time to think it up, I definitely like to. Now I'm thinking about the idea of a tavern where the unique thing is that the owner is also like the headline singer and is terrible, and that would be kind of a fun. Be kind of fun to have a tavern keep that's a bit of a miser, maybe cynical, recognizes that people travel through, this area, and will ask a lot of questions, and maybe there's a pricing on rooms, got a menu for drinks and food, and he's also got like a question menu. He's like, oh, you got something to say? Okay, great. 2 gold. What do you want to know? Charges up front. It's a good way to make enemies with a party, I think. Yeah, you can ask as many questions as you want. I'll keep your tab running. It also doesn't mean that the innkeeper has to know the answers or necessarily be trustworthy. Anybody who tries to capitalize on stuff like that is probably not the best character. Even though there's one thing about mimics in 5th edition that annoy me. I don't know if I'm the only one, but the monster manual says their attack is called pseudopod has always just kind of like been annoying to me. I don't think that's the right. I've always stumbled over that whenever I reference that, in a session, and I just like improvise my own description for the attack because pseudopod doesn't do it for me. I'm sure technically it describes something which is accurate to what's going on, but no, not my preferred action word in that case. It's so satisfying to get these things painted because they've literally been sitting in my collection of minis just waiting for this for, I don't know, 2 years. Now a lot of things have, but I had plenty of opportunities to use these painted minis in my game, so it's going to be awesome to have them in a ready to use state. And hopefully doing these streams, like, honestly, it's a way to try to get myself more time making stuff on a regular basis. Same thing, it really did end up looking like kind of a sad and like sick mimic coming out of this pot, which is kind of funny. Maybe what I thought when I was making maybe a monster like this ends up being more of a quest giver in the future, because almost a cartoonish face on this thing with the tongue and the that's not just a sick and sad mimic monster pot guy. I don't know if I'll have the heart to make him a real bad guy. He might need to be beseeching help from the party. He's seen better days. Which, honestly, this is one of the reasons I love painting minis so much. Coming away with I don't think I had considered having, a mimic of all things try to like seek help from the party, but seeing this soup pot mimic come out looking this way makes me think, that would actually be an interesting, like, a side quest, an interesting little thing about, like, where'd this guy come from, why does he look that way, what on earth could the players help with. That makes all the mini painting worth it if it's like, there's actually like a plot type of thing here, an idea worth further exploration.